My name is Rachel, and I'm 34 years old. As the co-owner of Williams Enterprises, I've built a successful life far from my hometown. Now I'm back for our first family reunion in 8 years, and I just found my name tag second after Michael. My brother simply says, Golden Son. Mom's always preferred him despite everything I've accomplished. She's planning some special surprise announcement tonight, and my stomach is in knots. I came hoping for reconciliation, but now I'm bracing for another disappointment. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit subscribe and stick around to see how I finally stood up to my mother's lifelong favoritism. I grew up in a quiet suburban neighborhood outside Boston, in what looked like a perfect middle-class family. Our house was always immaculate with manicured lawns and coordinated furniture that seemed designed more for appearances than comfort, much like our family dynamic itself. My father, Thomas, was a kind man who worked as an accountant. He wasn't particularly ambitious, but provided well for us. Dad always had a warm smile and encouraging words for me, but his defining characteristic was his passivity, especially when it came to my mother, Diana. He avoided conflict at all costs, which meant he rarely contradicted her decisions or defended me from her criticisms. My mother, Diana, was another story entirely. She worked as a real estate agent and was obsessed with status and appearances. Everything had to be perfect in her world, and that extended to her children. She had very specific ideas about success, and they all seemed to align perfectly with whatever Michael did. Michael, my brother, is 3 years older than me. He was the athletic, outgoing type with natural charisma that made him popular. Everyone loved Michael, especially my mother. What they didn't see was how he rarely followed through on commitments, and how his charm often masked a lack of responsibility. Still, in Diana's eyes, he could do no wrong. I was different. Quiet but determined, I excelled academically from an early age. While Michael was winning participation trophies in baseball, I was skipping grades in math and science. My achievements, however, never seemed to register with my mother the way Michael's did. One memory stands out vividly. I was 12 and had worked for months on a science fair project about renewable energy. I won first place at the state level, which meant I would go on to the national competition. It was the biggest achievement of my young life. The same weekend, Michael had a regular season baseball game where he hit a home run. Guess which event my mother attended? When I came home with my trophy, she barely glanced at it before launching into an excited retelling of Michael's home run. Dad congratulated me privately, but in that moment, I understood exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. This pattern continued throughout my childhood. When I made honor roll every semester, it was expected because I was the smart one. When Michael managed to get B's after nearly failing, there was a celebration dinner. The message was clear. Michael's minor successes were more important than my major ones. My 16th birthday crystallized this dynamic perfectly. For months, I had heard about how Michael received a used car when he turned 16. It wasn't fancy, but it represented freedom and my mother's approval. When my birthday arrived, I received a book on driving lessons and a speech about responsibility. "You can use Michael's car when he doesn't need it," my mother said, as if that was some kind of privilege. Michael got the car, I got the manual. That metaphor would repeat itself throughout our lives. My father tried in his quiet way to balance the treatment. He would slip me $20 for a movie when Mom wasn't looking, or help me with college applications late at night. But he never directly challenged the favoritism. "Your mother just worries about Michael more because things don't come as easily to him as they do to you," he would explain, as if that justified ignoring my accomplishments and needs. As I entered high school, I channeled my hurt into determination. If I couldn't get validation at home, I would find it elsewhere. I joined debate club and student government. I worked part-time jobs that my mother deemed unnecessary, but that gave me my first taste of financial independence. I poured myself into academics knowing that education was my ticket out. When college acceptance letters arrived, I received scholarships to several prestigious universities, including a full ride to a top business school. Rather than pride, my mother expressed disappointment that I hadn't chosen a more suitable career for a woman, suggesting teaching or nursing instead. "Business is so cutthroat, Rachel. I'm not sure you have the personality for it," she said, despite evidence of my leadership and academic excellence. I chose the business school against her wishes. It was the first major decision I made without seeking her approval, and it was liberating. Dad helped me move into my dorm, and as he hugged me goodbye, he whispered, "Show them what you're made of, Rachel." I think he was talking about more than just my professors. As I established my new life at college, the emotional distance between my family and me grew. Phone calls became shorter and less frequent. Holidays were tense affairs where I fielded questions about when I would get a real job or meet a nice man, while Michael's latest endeavors, no matter how short-lived, were discussed with enthusiasm. Despite building a successful early career, I still struggled with my self-worth. No matter what I achieved, there was always a voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like my mother saying it wasn't enough, that I wasn't enough. It would take years of therapy and genuine accomplishment to begin silencing that voice. My college years were a stark contrast to my childhood. For the first time, I was judged solely on my own merits without constant comparison to Michael. I thrived in that environment, though paying my own way through school meant working 2 part-time jobs while maintaining a full course load. My mother's prediction that I would fail in the cutthroat business world proved entirely wrong. Instead, I discovered I had both talent and appetite for strategic thinking and leadership. During my junior year, I secured a competitive internship at Williams Enterprises, a growing tech company that was disrupting the market with innovative solutions. The founder, James Williams, was a legend in the industry, known for his brilliant mind and unorthodox approach to business problems. I never expected to work directly with him, assuming I'd be relegated to coffee runs and spreadsheet management like most interns. Everything changed during my 3rd week. In a meeting where interns were invited to observe but not participate, I noticed a critical flaw in the marketing strategy being presented. Against protocol, I spoke up. The room fell silent, and I thought I'd just committed career suicide. But then James started asking me questions, challenging my observations. I held my ground, explaining my reasoning with data I'd been analyzing in my spare time. "Everyone else out," James finally said. "Except you, Rachel. You stay." That meeting turned into a 4-hour strategy session that fundamentally changed the company's approach to market expansion. By the end of it, James offered me a part-time position that would work around my class schedule with a promise of full-time employment after graduation. "Most people in this business are followers dressed as leaders," he told me. "You're the opposite. I need people who see what others miss." Under James's mentorship, I flourished. He became the supportive figure I'd never had, challenging me to grow while recognizing my contributions. What started as a standard mentor relationship evolved into a true partnership as my strategies helped Williams Enterprises expand exponentially into new markets. 3 years after joining the company full-time, James called me into his office. "I'm restructuring the company," he said, sliding a document across the desk. I feared the worst, assuming layoffs or reorganization. Instead, it was a partnership agreement offering me 50% ownership in exchange for my intellectual contributions to the company's growth and future strategic direction. "You built half this empire," James said simply. "You should own half of it." We kept the arrangement quiet, not because it was secret, but because James believed in letting results speak louder than titles. I continued working as the chief strategy officer while effectively co-running the company. My salary was generous but modest compared to my actual worth on paper. I preferred reinvesting in the company anyway, watching our shared vision come to life. Throughout these professional successes, I kept my family largely uninformed. My mother had shown so little interest in my career that it seemed pointless to share details she would dismiss. The few times I mentioned promotions or achievements, she would quickly change the subject to Michael's latest job prospect or girlfriend. It became easier to offer vague responses when asked about work, "It's going well," or "The company is growing." Meanwhile, I was building a fulfilling personal life as well. I met David at a charity gala where Williams Enterprises was a sponsor. He was an architect with his own successful firm designing sustainable buildings that were both beautiful and environmentally responsible. Unlike the men my mother repeatedly tried to set me up with, David wasn't intimidated by my ambition or success. Instead, he found it attractive. "I've never understood men who want to dim a woman's light to make themselves shine brighter," he told me on our 3rd date. I'd rather stand next to someone who burns as brightly as you do. After 2 years together, we moved into a beautiful apartment overlooking the city. David proposed on the rooftop garden he had designed as a surprise, understanding how much I needed green space in the urban environment. We set the wedding date for the following spring, giving us plenty of time to plan. It was around this time that the invitation to the family reunion arrived. 8 years had passed since I'd spent more than a holiday weekend in my hometown. The invitation mentioned it would be a 3-day affair to celebrate my parents' 35th wedding anniversary, with extended family coming from across the country. My first instinct was to decline politely, citing work commitments. Then came the phone call from my mother. "Michael is so excited to see you," she said, not bothering to mention her own feelings about my potential attendance. "He's between jobs right now, but your Uncle Robert might have something for him at his company. We'll be announcing it at the reunion." As always, the conversation centered on Michael, with barely a question about my own life. When I mentioned being engaged, she expressed surprise that I had time for dating with that job of yours, and immediately asked for details about David's family background, rather than congratulating us. After hanging up, I sat in silence for a long time. Part of me wanted to avoid the inevitable disappointment and subtle put-downs of a family gathering. Another part stubbornly wanted to show them the woman I'd become successful on my own terms, despite not because of my upbringing. "I'll go with you," David offered when I showed him the invitation. "Family is always complicated, but you don't have to face them alone." His support made the decision easier. With David beside me and years of therapy strengthening my sense of self, I felt ready to engage with my family without seeking their validation. I sent back the RSVP card marking 2 attendees, knowing this reunion would be different because I was different. No longer the overlooked daughter desperate for approval, I was returning as a woman who had created her own success story. What I didn't realize was how that story was about to dramatically change with a plot twist not even I could have predicted. The family estate looked exactly as I remembered it, a sprawling colonial-style house with perfect landscaping and a circular driveway now filled with unfamiliar cars. David whistled softly beside me as we pulled up. "You didn't mention your parents lived in a mansion," he said. "It's just a house," I replied, though I knew it was more than that. It was the stage where my mother had always directed our family performances, making sure we presented the perfect image to the world regardless of what happened behind closed doors. As we approached the front door, I smoothed down my simple but expensive dress, a habit from childhood when my appearance was constantly scrutinized. David squeezed my hand reassuringly, and I felt a surge of gratitude for his steady presence. My father opened the door before we could knock, his face lighting up at the sight of me. "Rachel." He embraced me warmly, the subtle scent of his aftershave bringing back a rush of childhood memories. He had more gray hair and deeper lines around his eyes, but his kind smile remained unchanged. "And you must be David. Welcome, welcome." He ushered us inside, where the entrance hall was buzzing with relatives I barely recognized. Aunts, uncles, and cousins milled about, many doing double takes as they realized who I was. 8 years had transformed me from the quiet, overlooked girl they remembered into a confident woman. "Rachel, is that you?" My Aunt Patricia approached, eyeing me with surprise. "My goodness, you look so professional. What are you doing these days? Still with that company?" Before I could answer, a familiar voice called out from across the room. "The prodigal daughter returns." Michael appeared, a beer in hand, looking much the same but slightly softer around the middle. He came over and gave me an awkward side hug. "Wasn't sure you'd actually show up, sis." "I said I would," I replied, simply introducing him to David. "Nice to meet the man brave enough to take on Rachel," Michael joked, shaking David's hand. "Fair warning, she's been competitive since we were kids." I forced a laugh, though the comment stung with its implication that my drive was some kind of character flaw. David smoothly changed the subject, asking Michael about himself, which was always his favorite topic. "I'm between opportunities right now," Michael explained, using the euphemism for unemployment. "Living in Mom and Dad's guest house while I figure out my next move. Uncle Robert might have something for me at his firm, though." "Michael." My mother's voice cut through the conversation as she descended the stairs like a queen making an entrance. She looked immaculate as always, not a hair out of place, wearing an expensive dress that highlighted her still slim figure. "There you are, darling." She embraced Michael as if they hadn't seen each other in years, rather than probably that morning, then turned to me with a considerably cooler expression. "Rachel, you made it." Her eyes flickered over me assessingly before landing on David. "And this is your boyfriend?" "Fiancé?" I corrected, watching her eyes widen slightly. "David, this is my mother, Diana." "Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Lawrence," David said, politely extending his hand. She took it briefly before turning back to Michael. "Darling, your uncle just arrived. You should go say hello before dinner." As Michael left, my mother directed us to the table where name tags were arranged. "Find your tags and then join everyone in the garden for drinks," she instructed before gliding away without further acknowledgement. I scanned the neat rows of name tags until I found mine, then froze as I read it, Rachel Lawrence, second after Michael. Next to it, Michael's tag proudly proclaimed, "Michael Lawrence, golden son." "Is this some kind of joke?" David asked, looking over my shoulder. I picked up the offensive tag, a familiar hollowness forming in my stomach. "No, this is just my mother being her authentic self." I pinned the tag to my dress, deciding this wasn't the battle to fight in the first hour of a 3-day reunion. Instead, I led David to the garden where my father immediately approached with drinks, clearly making an effort to make up for my mother's coldness. Throughout the afternoon, I attempted several times to share stories about my career or life in the city, only to be repeatedly interrupted or redirected. When I mentioned our recent expansion into Asian markets, my Uncle Robert immediately turned the conversation to Michael's brief stint teaching English in Japan 5 years earlier, which apparently made him an expert on Asian business culture. I noticed a pattern in how relatives referred to me, Michael's sister, or the other one, or Thomas's younger child. It was as if my identity existed only in relation to the men in my family, never standing on my own. During dinner, my mother stood to make an announcement, champagne flute in hand. "We are so blessed to have both our children home," she began, though her gaze lingered on Michael. "And we have exciting news to share. Robert has generously offered Michael a position as associate director at Lawrence Financial." Applause erupted around the table while I struggled to maintain a neutral expression. Michael had never shown interest or aptitude for finance, and associate director was a mid-level position, typically requiring years of experience. It was clearly a nepotism hire orchestrated by my mother to give Michael the appearance of success. "To Michael carrying on the family legacy," my mother continued, raising her glass. "And to Rachel," my father added hastily, "who has also done well in her business job." I felt David tense beside me at the vague, dismissive description of my role as co-owner of a multi-million-dollar company. Under the table, I placed my hand on his knee, silently asking him to let it go. This wasn't the time for corrections. After dinner, I excused myself to use the restroom, needing a moment alone. As I washed my hands, I studied my reflection in the mirror. Despite everything, I looked calm and collected, though I knew the emotional strain of maintaining that appearance. When I emerged, I nearly collided with my mother in the hallway. "Oh, there you are," she said, as if I'd been deliberately avoiding her. "About your name tag." "You mean where you labeled me second after Michael?" I asked quietly. "Was that really necessary, Mom?" She waved a dismissive hand. "It's just a little joke, Rachel. Don't be so sensitive. You always did take everything too personally." "It's not a joke if only one person is laughing," I replied evenly. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," she sighed. "Michael would have found it funny. He knows how to laugh at himself." Before I could respond, Michael himself appeared in the hallway looking uncomfortable. "Everything okay here?" Our mother's demeanor instantly changed, her voice warming. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Rachel and I were just catching up." She touched his arm affectionately, a gesture I couldn't remember her ever directing toward me. The contrast wasn't lost on Michael, who shot me an apologetic look. It wasn't his fault, not really. He had been as conditioned by our mother's favoritism as I had, albeit from the preferred position. As we rejoined the party, David whispered, "Are you okay?" I'm fine, I assured him, the phrase I'd perfected since childhood. Just one more day until the special gifts presentation, and then we can focus on visiting old friends instead of family. I didn't know then how that gifts presentation would become the catalyst for everything that followed, the moment when decades of favoritism would finally reach its breaking point. All I knew was that I needed to make it through the weekend with my dignity intact, a goal that suddenly seemed more challenging than running a multinational corporation. The second day of the reunion dawned bright and clear, a perfect summer day that contrasted sharply with the emotional storm brewing inside me. After a restless night in my childhood bedroom, which my mother had preserved like a museum to my teenage years, while converting Michael's room into a modern guest suite, I joined everyone for breakfast on the patio. "There's my corporate warrior," my father greeted me warmly, pulling out a chair. "Coffee?" David was just telling us about his architectural firm. I accepted the coffee gratefully, while listening to David charming my extended family with stories about sustainable design projects. He handled them expertly, deflecting personal questions and steering conversations toward neutral topics. Having him there was like having a skilled diplomat on my side, managing potential conflicts before they arose. Throughout the morning, relatives trickled in and out of conversations, many expressing surprise at learning details about my life and career. "Williams Enterprises, isn't that the big tech company that's been all over the business news?" my cousin Jennifer asked. "You work there? That's amazing." "I'm the chief strategy officer," I explained deliberately, understating my role out of long habit. "I've been with the company for about 10 years now." "Rachel's being modest," David interjected. "She's practically running the place. James Williams relies on her completely." My mother, overhearing this as she supervised the caterers setting up lunch, pursed her lips slightly. "It's nice that you enjoy your work, dear, but don't let it consume you. There's more to life than career success." The irony of this statement, coming from a woman who had meticulously crafted our family image around outward markers of success, wasn't lost on me. But before I could respond, she clapped her hands for attention. "Everyone, please finish breakfast soon. We'll have the big announcement and gifts presentation in 1 hour in the main living room." An undercurrent of excitement rippled through the gathering. My stomach tightened at the reminder of what was coming. Despite my professional confidence, being around my mother still had the power to reduce me to that overlooked child, desperate for recognition that never came. "Want to take a walk?" David suggested quietly, noticing my discomfort. We escaped for a brief stroll around the neighborhood, the familiar streets both comforting and strange after so many years away. I pointed out landmarks from my childhood, the corner where I waited for the school bus, the park where I read books while Michael played baseball, the library that had been my sanctuary. "You never really talk about your childhood," David observed. "Now I understand why." "It wasn't all bad," I said fairly. "Dad tried his best and I had good friends and teachers. It was just, at home, nothing I did was ever quite enough." "Well, I think you're more than enough," David said, stopping to kiss me gently. "And I'm starting to think we should limit holiday visits once we're married." I laughed, feeling some of the tension dissolve. "Let's get through this weekend first." When we returned to the house, everyone was gathering in the spacious living room. My mother had arranged chairs in a semicircle facing the large fireplace, where two covered objects stood on display. One was clearly large and bulky, the other small and rectangular. My father looked nervous, fidgeting with his collar in a way I recognized from childhood confrontations with my mother. Michael sat in the front row, looking somewhat uncomfortable as relatives patted his shoulder and whispered excitedly. Our eyes met briefly, and I was surprised to see something like apology in his expression. As the last guests took their seats, my mother stepped into the center of the room, commanding attention without saying a word. She was wearing a different outfit than earlier. I noticed something more formal and photographically perfect, as if this moment had been planned as a family tableau. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate 35 years of our family's journey." She began, looking around at the assembled relatives. "Thomas and I are blessed with a wonderful extended family, and of course our two children." She gestured toward Michael and me, though her gaze lingered on him. "Family legacy is everything. It's what we build, what we pass on, what defines us after we're gone. For the next 10 minutes, she spoke about family traditions and values, weaving a narrative that centered almost exclusively on Michael's achievements and contributions to the family name. My academic scholarship's business success, and even my engagement, were conspicuously absent from her family history. And now, she said, moving toward the covered objects, Thomas and I wanted to mark this special reunion with meaningful gifts for our children, symbols of our family legacy. She pulled the cover from the larger object first, revealing a beautifully restored vintage car, a 1967 Mustang in pristine condition. Gasps and appreciative murmurs filled the room. "For Michael," she announced proudly. "Your grandfather's car fully restored. The true heir to the family name deserves to carry on this legacy." Michael stood looking genuinely surprised and moved as he approached the symbolic gift. My mother embraced him tightly, whispering something that made him smile. Then she turned to the smaller object, removing the cover to reveal a toolbox. It was new and high quality, but the contrast to Michael's gift couldn't have been more stark. "And for Rachel," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, "a toolbox. Because it's never too late to start fixing your life." The room fell uncomfortably silent. A few nervous chuckles broke out, quickly stifled. I felt the weight of every gaze, a mixture of pity and secondhand embarrassment on my behalf. "Mom," Michael said quietly, looking horrified. "That's not funny." "Oh, Rachel knows I'm teasing," my mother said with a dismissive wave. "She's always been so serious about everything. This is just a reminder to lighten up." She winked at Michael. "After all, there's only one golden child in this family, right?" The cruel words hung in the air. I stood frozen, the familiar pain of public dismissal washing over me. But this time, something was different. Instead of shrinking into myself, I felt a calm clarity descending. "Thank you for the gift, Mother," I said evenly, my voice carrying in the silent room. I walked forward and picked up the toolbox, holding it with dignity. I've always believed in being self-sufficient. My father stepped forward, looking distressed. "Diana, this isn't what we discussed." "It's fine, Dad," I said quietly. "Really." But it wasn't fine, and everyone knew it. The perfect family image my mother had cultivated cracked visibly as relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some avoided eye contact while others watched the unfolding drama with poorly disguised interest. David stood and joined me, placing a supportive hand on my back. "Thank you for including Rachel in the presentation," he said diplomatically, though the steel in his voice was unmistakable. "We appreciate the thought." As the gathering broke up into awkward small groups, David whispered, "We can leave right now if you want." I considered it for a moment, the temptation to escape the humiliation nearly overwhelming. But running away would only reinforce the narrative my mother had created, that I was overly sensitive, unable to take a joke, always the difficult one. "No," I decided firmly. "We're staying. I'm not giving her the satisfaction." While outwardly I maintained composure, inside I was crumbling. I excused myself to use the bathroom, locking the door behind me before finally allowing the tears to fall. The deliberate cruelty of the moment, choreographed for maximum impact in front of the entire family, cut deeper than I had expected. After composing myself, I splashed water on my face and reapplied my makeup with steady hands. As I stepped into the hallway, I overheard my mother's voice from the adjacent study. "She's always been this way, Patricia. So serious and sensitive. I tried to include her today, but nothing is ever enough. Meanwhile, Michael takes everything in stride. That's why he'll always be more successful in the long run, mark my words." I recognized the familiar narrative, Rachel the difficult daughter, Michael the golden son. It was a story she had been telling for decades, and I realized in that moment that nothing I achieved would ever change it in her mind. With sudden resolve, I slipped away to make a phone call. James Williams answered on the second ring. "Rachel, how's the family reunion going?" "About as well as expected," I replied, keeping my voice low. "James, I've been thinking about that press announcement we were planning for next week. Any chance we could move it up?" There was a pause, then James asked with concern, "Is everything okay?" "It will be," I assured him. I think it's time to stop hiding my light under a bushel, as my grandmother would say. Always did like the sound of your grandmother, James chuckled. All right, I can make some calls. How does tomorrow morning sound early enough to make the Sunday business section? Perfect, I said, a weight lifting from my shoulders. And James, let's not hold anything back this time. As I ended the call, I caught sight of my reflection in a hallway mirror. For the first time since arriving at the reunion, I truly recognized myself, not the overlooked daughter seeking approval, but the powerful businesswoman who had built an empire. It was time the rest of my family saw that woman too. I rejoined the gathering with renewed purpose, no longer concerned with seeking my mother's validation. Tomorrow would bring a reckoning that had been 34 years in the making, and I was finally ready for it. The third day of the reunion began with an unexpected buzz of activity. As I descended the stairs for breakfast, I noticed several relatives huddled around smartphones and tablets, whispering excitedly. When they saw me, conversations abruptly halted, replaced by curious and somewhat bewildered looks. Good morning, I greeted them calmly, pouring myself a cup of coffee, as if nothing unusual was happening. My cousin Jennifer approached first, her expression a mixture of awe and confusion. Rachel, is this you? She held up her phone displaying the breaking business news headline, Williams Enterprises announces major leadership change, Rachel Lawrence, named CEO as founder, steps to chairman role. The accompanying photo showed me standing confidently beside James Williams at our headquarters, both of us smiling at the camera. The article detailed my 10-year journey with the company, my strategic vision that had grown the business exponentially, and the surprise revelation that I had been a 50% owner for the past 5 years. Oh yes, I confirmed casually. The announcement wasn't supposed to go out until next week, but plans change. More relatives gathered around, their expressions transforming from curiosity to astonishment as they skimmed the article describing me as one of the most influential women in tech and detailing the company's impressive growth under my strategic direction. You own half of Williams Enterprises, my Uncle Robert asked incredulously, the same uncle who had secured Michael's nepotism position. That's a multi-billion-dollar company. 10 years of sweat equity and strategic vision, I replied simply. James and I built it together. The news spread through the house like wildfire. My father appeared, his face lighting up as he read the announcement over someone's shoulder. He rushed to embrace me, genuine pride radiating from him. My brilliant girl, he whispered. I always knew. My mother and Michael entered the room together, immediately sensing the changed atmosphere. Michael noticed the phones and tablets first, his brow furrowing as he glimpsed a headline. What's going on? My mother demanded, always hating to be the last to know anything. Jennifer handed her phone to my mother, whose expression shifted dramatically as she read the article. Her perfectly composed facade cracked momentarily, revealing shock and something that looked almost like fear before she quickly reassembled her mask. Well, she said finally, her voice overly bright. Isn't this wonderful news? Our Rachel, a CEO. Of course, I always knew you had potential, dear. The blatant revision of history might have worked if we hadn't all witnessed her humiliating gift presentation just yesterday. Several relatives exchanged knowing glances, the contrast between her previous dismissal and current claim of unwavering support too stark to ignore. Michael approached me, genuine admiration in his eyes. Congratulations, Rach. This is incredible. He lowered his voice. And impeccable timing. Mom nearly choked on her coffee. I smiled, surprised by his sincerity. Thanks, Michael. Throughout the morning, the dynamic shifted noticeably. Relatives who had previously overlooked me now sought me out, asking questions about my work and accomplishments. Several apologized for not realizing the extent of my success, though the information had always been available had anyone bothered to ask. My mother attempted to capitalize on the revelation, suddenly positioning herself as my biggest supporter. Rachel has always been so independent, she told anyone who would listen. I encouraged her to make her own way rather than relying on family connections. That's why she's so successful today. I overheard this particular revision while helping arrange food for lunch and decided the time for polite silence had passed. Setting down the tray I was carrying, I approached my mother and the small group of relatives she was addressing. "That's an interesting perspective, Mom," I said calmly. "Especially considering yesterday you gave me a toolbox and suggested I fix my life while calling Michael the only golden child in the family." The relatives around us shifted uncomfortably. My mother's smile tightened. "You're still upset about that little joke? This is exactly what I mean about taking things too seriously, Rachel." "It wasn't a joke," I replied, maintaining eye contact. "It was the culmination of a lifetime of favoritism and dismissal. You've never supported my choices or celebrated my successes the way you've celebrated Michael's." "That's not true," she protested, looking around for support. "I've always been equally proud of both my children." "Mom," Michael said, joining us with a pained expression. "Don't. We all know the truth." Her eyes widened at this unexpected betrayal from her favorite child. "Michael, what are you saying?" "I'm saying Rachel's right," he admitted. "You've always favored me even when I didn't deserve it. I've gotten praise for mediocrity while Rachel's excellence was ignored. It wasn't fair then, and it's not fair now to pretend it never happened." My mother's composure crumbled entirely. "How can you both attack me like this after everything I've done for this family?" Her voice rose dramatically. "I've only ever wanted what's best for everyone." "No," I said quietly but firmly. "You've wanted what looks best for everyone. There's a difference." "You've always been jealous of your brother's natural charm," she accused, reverting to her familiar narrative. "Always competing, always trying to outdo him instead of finding your own path." "I did find my own path," I pointed out. "That's precisely what you couldn't accept. My success didn't fit your script for who I was supposed to be." "And who exactly was she supposed to be, Diana?" My father interjected, his voice carrying an unusual authority that silenced the room. He approached us, standing beside Michael and me in a united front. "What was Rachel's role in the story you were telling?" My mother looked between the three of us, suddenly outnumbered. "I don't know what you're talking about, Thomas." "Yes, you do," he insisted. "You decided early on that Michael was the star and Rachel was the supporting character. You assigned them roles when they were children and refused to revise the script even as Rachel excelled beyond anyone's expectations." "That's absurd," she scoffed, though her voice lacked conviction. "Is it?" My father continued, surprising me with his directness. "Then explain the name tags. Explain the toolbox. Explain why Rachel's Harvard MBA never warranted a celebration dinner, but Michael changing majors 3 times was treated as inspired exploration." With each example, my mother seemed to physically shrink, her carefully constructed narrative crumbling around her. "I was just trying to motivate Rachel," she said weakly. "She didn't need the same encouragement as Michael. She was always so capable." "So you punished me for being capable?" I asked, the pieces finally falling into place. "You withheld approval because I didn't need it as desperately as Michael did." The unfairness of this revelation struck me anew. All those years of working harder, achieving more, only to be deliberately denied the recognition freely given to my brother, simply because I could function without it. My mother had no answer, her carefully constructed world of family mythology collapsing under the weight of truth spoken aloud. For perhaps the first time in her life, Diana Lawrence had no ready explanation or deflection. "I think," she said finally, gathering the remnants of her dignity, "I need to lie down for a while." She retreated upstairs, leaving an uncomfortable silence in her wake. The confrontation had been witnessed by much of the extended family, who now dispersed in awkward clusters, processing what they had seen. The perfect family image had been shattered, replaced by the messy, complicated reality that had always existed beneath the surface. Michael touched my arm gently. "We should talk," he said. "Privately." I nodded, following him to the back porch where we had played as children, now ready for an adult conversation that was decades overdue. The truth had finally been spoken aloud, and nothing would be the same again. Michael and I sat on the old porch swing, the chains creaking softly with our movement just as they had throughout our childhood. For a while, neither of us spoke, the weight of the morning's confrontations settling around us like the summer humidity. "I owe you an apology," Michael finally said, staring out at the garden rather than looking at me directly. "Several apologies, actually." I waited, giving him space to continue. "I knew," he admitted. "I always knew Mom favored me. At first, when we were kids, it just seemed normal because I didn't know any different. But as we got older, it became impossible to ignore, and I let it happen anyway." "You were a child too, Michael," I said softly. "It wasn't your responsibility to correct our mother's behavior." "Maybe not then, but I'm 37 now. I've had plenty of time to say something, and I never did." He turned to face me, regret evident in his expression. "The truth is, it was easier not to rock the boat. I benefited from being the golden child, even if I didn't earn it." His honesty surprised me. The Michael I remembered had always deflected responsibility, much like our mother. This self-awareness suggested he had done some growing up that wasn't immediately apparent from the surface. "Can I ask you something?" I ventured. When he nodded, I continued, "Are you happy, Michael? With your life, your choices?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "God, no. I'm 37, living in our parents' guest house between jobs for the third time in 5 years. Mom's constantly making excuses for me to relatives, securing positions through family connections that I'm not qualified for and usually can't keep." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so familiar it brought back childhood memories. "I'm a middle-aged man who's never stood on his own 2 feet. That's not entirely your fault," I pointed out. "Mom never expected you to. She's enabled your dependence while pushing me toward independence, then resenting me for achieving it." "Classic Diana Lawrence parenting." Michael agreed with a wry smile. "But I'm still responsible for my choices, just like Mom is responsible for hers." We sat in silence for another moment before Michael spoke again. "I saw that article about your company. It's incredible, Rachel, truly. But why didn't you ever tell us all these years you've downplayed your success? Why?" I considered the question carefully. At first, it was self-protection. If Mom didn't know how well I was doing, she couldn't dismiss it or compare it unfavorably to whatever you were doing. Later, it became habit. I shrugged. "And honestly, what would have been the point? No achievement of mine has ever impressed her." "Well, I'm impressed," Michael said simply. "And a little intimidated, to be honest." That made me laugh. The golden child intimidated by the afterthought Mom would be scandalized. We shared a genuine smile, perhaps the first in many years, and I felt something shift between us. Without our mother's manipulations creating constant comparison and competition, maybe there was room for an authentic sibling relationship. "So what happens now?" Michael asked. "With you being CEO and everything." "I keep building the company with James," I said. "We have some exciting expansions planned, new markets we're entering." I hesitated, then added, "Actually, we're looking for someone to head our community relations department. Someone personable, good, with people who can be the public face for our philanthropic initiatives." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Are you offering me a job? Because if it's out of pity—" "It's not," I assured him. "You're genuinely good with people, Michael. Always have been. It's a real skill one I don't have naturally. The position would require actual work and meeting real expectations, but if you're interested, I think you could excel there." "Without any business background or relevant experience?" he asked skeptically. "You'd start at an appropriate level and work your way up just like anyone else," I explained. "No shortcuts, no special treatment. But yes, I believe you could do it if you committed yourself." He was quiet for a moment, considering. "I'd like to try," he finally said. "An honest job based on what I can actually contribute rather than who our mother knows. That sounds refreshing." Just then the porch door opened and our father stepped out, looking emotionally drained but somehow lighter than I'd seen him in years. "Mind if I join you two?" We made room for him on the porch swing, the 3 of us crowded together like when Michael and I were small enough to sit on his lap for bedtime stories. "Your mother's resting," he said, which we all understood as code for recovering from having her carefully constructed reality challenged. "I wanted to talk to you both without her present." He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. I owe you both an apology, especially you, Rachel. I saw what was happening all these years and didn't do enough to stop it. I made excuses, told myself it wasn't that bad or that confronting your mother would only make things worse. Why didn't you? I asked the question I'd wondered for decades. Stand up to her, I mean. He sighed heavily. The simplest answer is cowardice. I avoided conflict at all costs, and your mother, well, conflict is her natural element. He looked out across the yard, his expression distant. Our marriage hasn't been healthy for a long time. Diana needs control and admiration the way other people need air. Early on, I found it easier to give her what she wanted rather than fight, and eventually it became our normal. That doesn't explain why you let her treat Rachel so differently, Michael pointed out, surprising me with his directness. No, it doesn't, our father agreed sadly. I told myself I was making it up to you privately, Rachel. The little encouragements, helping with college applications, being proud of you in ways your mother couldn't be. But it wasn't enough, and I knew it wasn't enough. He took my hand, his eyes moist with unshed tears. I failed you, and I'm deeply sorry. The simple, straightforward apology broke something open inside me. All these years I'd wanted acknowledgement of what I'd experienced, validation, that it wasn't just in my head or my being too sensitive, as my mother always claimed. Thank you, Dad, I said, my own voice thick with emotion. That means a lot. We sat together for a while longer, talking more openly than we ever had before. My father revealed that he'd been unhappy for years, but stayed for the children, then out of habit and fear of change. Michael admitted the pressure of being the golden child had its own costs, creating a fear of failure that paralyzed him. I shared how therapy had helped me recognize the patterns from our childhood and begin to break free from them. As lunch approached, we reluctantly rejoined the reunion activities. The atmosphere had changed noticeably. My mother eventually reappeared subdued, but determined to maintain the appearance of control. She avoided direct conversation with me, instead focusing her attention on peripheral relatives who hadn't witnessed the morning's confrontation. Surprisingly, several family members approached me privately throughout the afternoon, sharing their own experiences with Diana's manipulations and judgments over the years. Aunt Patricia confessed she'd always seen the favoritism, but didn't feel it was her place to interfere. My cousin Jennifer revealed that her mother had compared her unfavorably to me for years, ironically holding up my career as the standard Jennifer should aspire to, despite Diana's own dismissal of my choices. It seems that no one measures up in Aunt Diana's world, Jennifer observed. We're all falling short of some impossible standard that keeps shifting. The standard isn't actually achievement, I realized aloud. It's compliance with her vision. Michael was the favorite not because he achieved more, but because he didn't challenge her authority or narrative. As these conversations unfolded, I observed my mother watching from a distance, clearly unsettled by the shifting family dynamic she could no longer control. The confrontation had cracked the facade, and now truth was seeping through from all directions. By the time dinner was served, Diana had recovered enough to attempt damage control. She approached me as I helped set the table, speaking in a carefully modulated voice meant to carry to nearby relatives. Rachel, darling, I've been thinking about our little misunderstanding. I hope you know how proud I've always been of you. Different children need different kinds of support, that's all. Perhaps I pushed you harder because I saw your potential. It was the closest thing to an apology I was likely to get, though it still rewrote history to cast her in a favorable light. In the past, I might have accepted this non-apology to keep the peace. Today, I simply met her gaze steadily. I appreciate you saying that, Mom, I replied, matching her volume. I hope moving forward we can build a more honest relationship based on who we actually are, rather than who you wanted us to be. Her smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, dear. That's exactly what I want too. It wasn't, of course. What she wanted was to reclaim control of the narrative, to reestablish herself as the benevolent matriarch whose wisdom and guidance had shaped her children's success rather than hindered it. But that story no longer held power over me, and from the thoughtful looks on many relatives' faces, it had lost its hold on them as well. As the final dinner of the reunion came to a close, I realized I had a choice. I could use this moment to humiliate my mother, as she had humiliated me countless times, exposing every manipulation and lie to the assembled family. It would be satisfying, perhaps even justified. Instead, I chose a different path. When everyone raised their glasses for a final toast, I stood. To family, I said simply. Not the perfect image we pretend to be, but the imperfect, complicated people we actually are. May we have the courage to see each other clearly and the grace to love each other anyway. Across the table, my mother's eyes met mine, a complex mixture of emotions flashing across her face: anger, fear, grudging respect, and perhaps, just perhaps, the beginning of understanding. It wasn't reconciliation, not yet, but it was a start. The reunion was ending, but a new chapter in our family story was just beginning. 1 month after the family reunion, I stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office, watching the city bustle below. The transition to CEO had been smoother than expected, with James mentoring me through the public aspects of the role that had never been my natural strength. The business world had responded positively to the leadership change, our stock price climbing steadily, as investors expressed confidence in the direction of the company. A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Michael entered, looking almost unrecognizable in a well-fitted suit, his hair neatly trimmed and his posture straighter than I'd seen in years. The Richardson Foundation confirmed for next Tuesday, he reported, setting a folder on my desk. They're interested in partnering on the education initiative. I've included their questions and some proposed responses for your review. I flipped through the meticulously prepared materials, impressed with the thoroughness. This is excellent work, Michael. Very comprehensive. He smiled, the praise clearly meaningful to him. Thanks. I wanted to get it right. In the month since the reunion, Michael had surprised everyone, perhaps himself most of all, with his dedication to his new role. Starting in an assistant position in the Community Relations Department, he had quickly demonstrated a natural talent for connecting with people and understanding stakeholders' needs. His charm, once used primarily to deflect responsibility, now served as a genuine asset in building relationships with community partners. Have you spoken to Mom lately? I asked, closing the folder. Michael's expression grew more serious. Yesterday, actually. She and Dad had their first counseling session. According to Dad, it was intense. Following the reunion, our parents had made the unexpected decision to try marriage counseling, a suggestion that came from our father rather than our mother. More surprising was Diana's agreement to participate, though I suspected it had more to do with maintaining appearances than genuine desire for change. Did she mention our family session next week? I asked. Michael nodded. She's nervous, but says she's committed to the process. He hesitated, then added, I'm not sure how much she'll actually be able to acknowledge or change, Rachel. Her version of reality is pretty deeply entrenched. I know. I said, neither of us needing to articulate that Diana's primary motivation was likely fear of losing connection with her children, rather than genuine recognition of her harmful behavior. But I think it's important we try for all of us. The decision to attempt family therapy had been difficult. After years of dismissal and favoritism, part of me wanted to simply cut ties and move forward without the emotional drain of my mother's manipulation. David had supported whatever choice I made, while my therapist had gently suggested that closure might be valuable regardless of the outcome. In the end, I chose to give my mother one opportunity to participate in a healing process with clear boundaries and the assistance of a professional. I harbored no illusions about miraculous transformations or tearful Hollywood reconciliations, but even small shifts in our family dynamic could make future interactions less painful. By the way, Michael said, changing the subject, David called. He said the wedding venue confirmed your date for spring. I smiled at the thought. David and I had set our wedding for April, a small ceremony in a botanical garden, followed by an intimate reception. After the reunion, we'd made the decision to invite family, but create an event that centered on our relationship and future rather than past dynamics. He also mentioned something about your house hunting trip this weekend, Michael continued. He really liked that place in Oakwood Hills. The property was beautiful, with enough space for the family we hope to build someday. More importantly, it represented a fresh start. A home with no history of favoritism or emotional manipulation, where children, if we chose to have them, would be valued for who they were, rather than how well they performed or conformed. "We're putting in an offer," I confirmed. "It feels right." Michael nodded approvingly, then checked his watch. "I should get back. I have a call with the education board in 15 minutes. As he turned to leave, I was struck by how much had changed between us. Without our mother's constant comparison creating artificial competition, we were slowly building a genuine sibling relationship based on mutual respect. After Michael left, I returned to the window, reflecting on the remarkable transformations of the past month. The professional recognition that came with my CEO appointment was gratifying, but the personal growth felt even more significant. For the first time, I was living authentically in all aspects of my life, no longer minimizing my achievements or seeking validation that would never come. Later that evening, I met David for dinner at our favorite restaurant where we discussed wedding plans and our future home. As we walked back to our apartment under a sky scattered with stars, I shared my thoughts about the upcoming family therapy session. "I'm nervous," I admitted. "Part of me still expects her to twist everything, make me feel like I'm overreacting or being too sensitive." David squeezed my hand reassuringly. "You know that's not true, though. That's the difference now." He was right. The most profound change wasn't in my mother or even in my relationship with her, but in myself. The little girl who had desperately sought maternal approval had grown into a woman who recognized her own worth, independent of anyone else's validation. That weekend, David and I visited my father for lunch. He looked healthier than he had in years, having started a walking routine and reconnected with old friends since the reunion. Though still living with my mother, he was establishing boundaries and reclaiming parts of himself that had been subsumed in their dysfunctional dynamic. "I want you to know," he told me as David helped clear the dishes, "that I'm proud of you. Not because you're a CEO or successful by external measures, but because of who you are. Your compassion, your resilience, your integrity. Those are the things that matter." The simple words spoken with genuine emotion healed something deep within me that expensive therapy sessions hadn't quite reached. It wasn't that I needed parental approval anymore, but hearing the words I'd longed for as a child helped integrate the wounded parts of my younger self with the confident woman I'd become. The following week brought our first family therapy session. My mother arrived impeccably dressed as always, but there was a vulnerability in her eyes I rarely saw. The therapist, Dr. Collins, created a structured environment where each of us could speak without interruption, establishing rules that prevented Diana's usual tactics of deflection and revision. "I didn't realize," my mother said during her turn, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "how much my actions affected you, Rachel. I thought I was motivating you to excel. I didn't see it as favoritism." It wasn't a complete acknowledgement, still framing her behavior as well-intentioned rather than harmful, but it was more than I had ever expected from her. "It felt like nothing I achieved was ever good enough," I responded when my turn came. While Michael received praise for minimal effort, I had to be exceptional just to be noticed. My mother flinched slightly but didn't interrupt a small but significant change from her usual defensive reactions. By the end of the session, no miraculous breakthrough had occurred, but small cracks had appeared in the walls between us. Dr. Collins suggested we continue with both individual and family therapy, a recommendation my mother surprisingly accepted. Over the subsequent months, our family dynamic continued to evolve. Diana still concerned with appearances and resistant to deep change, but she made efforts within her capabilities. She began asking questions about my work and actually listening to the answers. She sent thoughtful engagement gifts to David and me. Small steps, but meaningful ones. Michael thrived in his new position, eventually earning a promotion to Community Outreach Coordinator based on genuine merit rather than nepotism. He moved out of our parents' guest house into his own apartment, establishing independence for perhaps the first time in his adult life. As for me, I discovered that success meant something different than I had once thought. It wasn't about proving my worth to my mother or accumulating achievements to counter her dismissal. Real success was building a life aligned with my values, surrounded by people who saw and appreciated me for who I truly was. The wedding in April was beautiful in its simplicity and authenticity. My father walked me down the aisle with tears of pride in his eyes. Michael gave a heartfelt speech as my man of honor, acknowledging our complicated past and celebrating our stronger future. My mother behaved graciously, making a visible effort to focus attention on me rather than redirecting it to herself or Michael. As David and I settled into our new home and shared life, I found myself reflecting often on the journey that had brought me here. The toolbox my mother had given me at the reunion, intended as a humiliating reminder of my supposed inadequacy, now sat on a shelf in my home office, transformed into a symbol of resilience and self-reliance. Sometimes the most hurtful gifts carry unexpected wisdom when viewed from a different perspective. I've learned that family wounds run deep but aren't necessarily fatal. Healing doesn't always mean perfect reconciliation or dramatic transformations. Sometimes it's about small shifts in perspective, establishing healthier boundaries, and finding peace with imperfect relationships. Most importantly, I've discovered that self-worth isn't bestowed by parental approval or external validation. It comes from within, from living authentically, and creating your own definition of success, rather than chasing someone else's. As a leader, I've made it my mission to create a corporate culture that values diverse contributions and recognizes achievement in all its forms. The mentorship program I established for young women in business has become a cornerstone of our company's identity, giving others the support and recognition I once longed for myself. If you're struggling with family favoritism or feeling overlooked despite your best efforts, know that your worth isn't determined by others' ability to see it. Build your life on your terms. Find people who value you for who you are, and remember that the most meaningful validation comes from living in alignment with your own values, rather than someone else's expectations. Have you experienced family favoritism in your own life? How did you handle it? Share your stories in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more real-life experiences and lessons learned along the way. Remember, sometimes the people who see your value least clearly are those who should see it most, but that doesn't diminish your worth in any way. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you find peace in your own family journey.